Hi everybody, this is Greg Tanner for The Mindful Eye and the Photo of the Week on the Daily Critique. This week's Photo of the Week was submitted by David, who is from Scotland, and David submitted this as part of the Mindful Eyes community assignment number 20, which was light painting. David shot this with a Pentax K20D and 18 to 55 zoom at 18 millimeters. So after the conversion for the crop factor, it's a semi-wide shot, somewhere around 28 or 30 millimeters. David shot this at ISO 100 f5.6, and 6 seconds was the exposure, and shot at a white balance of daylight. And David explains his technique here. He says that he was on the beach. He has a rock pool with water in the foreground, so he's got some reflections here in the foreground. We'll talk more about that in a minute. And he says that he is spinning steel wool that's been ignited, and it's on a chain. And he says safety precautions were taken. We could say something like, don't try this at home, but lots of people probably will go out and try this, and hopefully you'll do it somewhere like David did at the beach, where it's very, very easy to put the fire out if things get out of control. An interesting thing about the backstory here is that David says he accidentally shot this image at ISO 1600 on one night and had too much noise, and went back and did it again at ISO 100. So just a quick technical thing that could be a great takeaway from the critique today. Very powerful. We can change the ISO from shot to shot on a digital camera, but that can also come back to haunt us. And the ISO is a camera control that I sort of am in the habit of almost kind of obsessively looking at whenever I'm shooting, just to make sure, because I shoot a lot of different things, and I'll shoot everything from landscapes to handheld shots of people, and I do a lot of photography at night in low light of people mainly, and regularly turning my ISO up to very high ISOs like 5,000, where if I was going to put the camera on the tripod, I wouldn't want to have all that noise. It's just a basic technical thing. So many different things that I like about this image, with one of the first being color. I love color, and this is a real simple image in terms of showing us a very powerful use of the idea of complementary color pair, color opposites on the painter's color wheel, obviously blue and orange. Very powerful use of that. David mentions shooting white balance of daylight, and this is just a classic from a white balance standpoint. Steel wool is on fire, flame is burning at a very low Kelvin temperature, very warm, and a cool blue of twilight, very cool, very blue. You've got sort of probably something like 9,000 or 10,000 degrees Kelvin, and for the twilight sky, so 10K here, and then the flame, burning at something like, let's say, 2.5K, and a white balance is of daylight is sitting here at around 5K, and so relative to that, the flame comes out very warm. Relative to white balance, the twilight comes out very, very cool. And we get this really beautiful difference between warm and cool in the blue-orange color pair. And we recorded a whole video on white balance under our Foundation Concept series. If white balance is something you sort of struggle with understanding, it's a good video to get a basic understanding of how powerful that camera control is in terms of either getting rid of color cast or pushing colors in creative ways. So just love what's happening here in terms of color and white balance. Another thing that I really love about this image, and it's something that I talk about quite a bit when I teach design, and I think about it a lot, is, to me, this image has some really beautiful layers of story. You're really sort of confronted right away with a high contrast, and the texture, and the shape, all these different ideas that the steel wool spinning represents. But multiple design concepts here are creating the illusion that you can move through the image on the z-axis, which can be very, very powerful for the viewer. One of those things we've already mentioned, the difference between warm and cool. Warm seems to come forward, and here it actually is closer, physically closer, and cooler colors seem to recede. Another thing here is the difference in the textures. Obviously, the texture of the steel wool spinning, a lot higher contrast, a lot higher energy than the smooth of the dark shadows and the sky behind. Then you just have the idea of openings based on positive and negative space shape. So there's actually an outline with a contouring line of an area where it's very easy to imagine moving through or past the steel wool and going into the background. And out here on the outside too, being able to do that. Very, very powerful from that standpoint. Another thing that I really enjoy is very subtle, but I think the bigger this is printed, the more you get a sense of it, is the archetype or sort of the outline. I'm assuming that's David there spinning the chain of sort of this figure that's framed by the circle. That helps to, in an archetypal way, draw my mind past um, the information in the front part of the shot. And just the archetype here too of the opening of a circle. Something else is very powerful. I've talked about this quite a bit in the last few months, but it's such a great idea in terms of design. Juxtaposition, working one concept against another, very, very powerful because it creates contrast, and a lot of times it can either create design depth or psychological depth. But in this image, you have the juxtaposition of an idea like a circle, sort of this very smooth, very natural feeling geometric shape, juxtaposed with other ideas that are much harder edge. And to me, that's another sort of idea in terms of juxtaposition that's playing out here that's very powerful. If you look at this as an overall sort of negative space shape down here, very, very rough, very different geometry than the circle. And another thing that I really enjoy about this image is I believe this must be the rock pool down here, and the reflections on the surface of the water look surreal. This actually looks like a metallic surface down here. It almost looks like metal floating on water, and that adds to the mystery of the shot for me, and has a big effect on me as the viewer. It's funny, I could easily imagine an image that is much simpler than this if these lines came down into here and you sort of cropped this like this, and this negative space was filled in, so you just had this shot where it's more like a circle, the figure in here, and then it kind of gets broken up on the right hand side. This is another variation on this that I could see, but I really enjoy this being presented just the way it is, for this rough edge and this kind of surreal area down in here playing off of the simplicity of the idea of the circle. And another thing here that's very powerful is just the circle being right in the middle of the image, with a rectangular frame, just kind of pushing against the idea of dynamic placement of subjects. Very, very beautiful shot on a lot of different levels. This is one that I could look at for a very long time. So many details and so many things to just sort of get inside of in terms of moving in, from a design standpoint. I wanted to look at one other image that was submitted for this assignment. This one was submitted by Stephen. Don't have any more backstory on this one. To me, more of a classical idea of light painting, a landscape shot with a dock, and it looks like Stephen has used a light to light the dock up, and just a real simple leading line to lead the mind's eye out to the landscape and this really beautiful sky and the reflection of the sky in the water. And maybe there's a moon up here, maybe it's just leftover twilight, but the backlit clouds. And another thing here that's very powerful is this looks like a really long exposure, so there's a real strong sense of motion being juxtaposed with something that's more static. That can have a big psychological impact, helps to simplify the sky. Really beautiful colors here, just working the cool end of things. Greens and blues can be very, very calming, have a very, very different psychological impact than the difference between something like blue and orange. Really beautiful image, and a lot of negative space here that's very dark, and I think that could play really well in a high contrast image like this, where the background is high contrast, just being able to settle down in the lower part of the image with the negative space. One of the things that I talk about quite a bit when I'm talking about composition is if we do have very small areas of extremely high contrast, so there's a lot of visual energy, that a lot of times those are the kinds of shots where an enormous amount of negative space can play really well, because the simplicity and the quiet of this negative space, it could take a lot of this potentially to balance an area like this in the image. Two very beautiful images. I want to say a big thank you to David and Stephen for sharing these with us and participating in our community assignment. Really encourage you to participate in that part of the website. Assignments are a great way to grow your photography and to take on a new challenge, to shoot in a new way. We just did a weekend event in Seattle, Washington. I can't tell you how many people asked me sort of how can I get beyond where I am? What are some very basic things that I can practice? And I don't want to be a master of the obvious here, but we have to be willing to try new things. We have to shoot in different ways. If we want to have a different result than when we're practicing, then we have to practice in new ways. And taking on assignments can be a great way to get outside of just the habit of how we've been practicing, and to try something new. Would love to see you at one of our weekend events. We had such a great time in Seattle. I want to say a huge thank you to all the people that were there, and really looking forward to the other cities that we're going to be visiting. And would love to see you in Savannah, one of our 2 workshops that we have space left on in the spring, Next Step Workshop and our Street Portrait Workshop. Thank you so much for being here. Hope to see you again real soon on The Mindful Eye.